So, so, um, anti-Semitism is arguably one of the most persistent and pervasive mental illnesses that have that has been featured in society. I call it a mental illness and stuff because no matter when it comes to anti-Semites, no matter what you tell them, no matter what evidence you show them and stuff, that their beliefs are wrong, they they just they either can't get the language correct or they just can't come off of their belief and stuff. They won't improve their belief. Um, in as as a person of Jewish descent on my father's side of family, and arguably even my mother's side of family, it is alleged that my mother's side of family are originally Mizrahis that converted to another religion um, a few generations ago. Um, my father's side of family are like considering all the branches, they're half Ashkenazi Jewish, and you know I grew up on the edge of a Jewish neighborhood. So there were Orthodox Jews, you know, Orthodox Hasidim, um, conservative Jews, and whatnot. Um, and I and in my life, I've gotten to know many Jews and many kinds of Jews and many Jews in different occupations and stuff. And most of the criminal behaviors, sick behaviors that I've seen, almost all of it have actually come from non-Jews, um, which can be considered overrepresentation, right? But the heinous things I've seen, I'll I'll give you an example. There was this kid, I still remember him from my high school and stuff because he was one of the most arrogant, snobby, belligerent, unreasonable, just generally freaking ridiculous people I've ever met and stuff. Um, he, uh, his fam, his family was from, you know, they were another religion. They were not Jewish and stuff. Um, because I don't want to make it seem like I have a problem with non-Jews because I don't. I just have a problem with anti-Semitism and stuff. And when, it's about like a year and a half to 2 years of mainstream anti-Semitism kind of gnawing away at my brain, making me upset. Um, especially in the wake of what happened in October 7th and stuff, and people trying to somehow spin that into something that was initiated by Jews, um, or Sabra, you know, or Sabarim, or whatever you want to call them, or the Sephardi or Mizrahi, or the Ashkenazi that lived in Israel. So just to give you my energetic motivation for saying this. Um, so he was not of any Jewish ethnicity, and his family um, was not was not religiously Jewish, and he, and he uh, they made very good money. He wore nice, expensive clothes and stuff. I'm pretty sure he had a pretty nice car and stuff. Uh, and he always had a big wad of cash with him and stuff. I used to see it and stuff, because he would take out his wallet and stuff, and there'd be like just like maybe a 1 inch wide wad of cash of 20s, 50s and stuff. And except he would never pay for anything himself. He was always asking his quote unquote friends for money and stuff. And um, so this guy was a parasite. you know? And I saw people like this all over. And guess what? None of them were Jews. Almost all of the Jews, both secular or not, I've met and stuff, were actually were actually gentle, honest, um, people, genuine people, helpful people with humility and stuff. You know, the in Jewish culture, one of the central themes is tikkun olam, which is a Hebrew word for healing the world, fixing the world's problems. Okay, um, and so, and that's I'm not giving empirical data here, but this is my true experience that I'm sharing with you. Um, I have plenty of data to back up what I'm saying too and stuff. I've I've read Jewish history on and off for probably 12 years now and stuff. And I'll tell you that a lot of this, mainstream stuff or very active underground material that's been circulating a lot that's trying to make Jews look like murderers, parasites, criminals, etc. and stuff is complete nonsense. Lacks citations, wouldn't survive peer review, none of that stuff. This is all stuff that's basically like the nutritious mental breadcrumbs for, what are effectively intellectual rats, vermin, and stuff that um, that get off on reading that stuff because their delicate dream has to be satisfied and stuff. And that's the problem with human psychology, isn't it? And so that humans need to have their little fairy tales that they believe and stuff. They need to have somebody in their community that, you know, makes up these sort of Thomas Nast-like cartoons and stuff that circulate these stories, you know, these AI generated videos and stuff of that defame and slander Jews and stuff that eventually lead to hate crimes. You know, I can't imagine how much misery and heartbreak that's going to be visited upon Jewish parents, children, and stuff when they find out their loved ones are probably going to be murdered over anti-Semitism, whatever, you know, or that, because people insist on accusing, again, accusing Jews of being parasites, murderers, and stuff, of being political saboteurs, of being liars, of being sexual abusers or perverts um, towards teenagers and children. You know, it's um, who accuse um, who basically flip the facts and try to make terrorists look like saints or heroes, and make saints and heroes look like terrorists, aggressors, and stuff. Because this is not the case. And when you read the history, you know that Jews have been ear tagged, identified, hunted systematically for hundreds of years and stuff over and over. Because humans don't mix with people who are different, who are actually different and stuff, like in the way they think, different character and stuff like that. The character of their soul and things like that. Things like that make a person, think and act different and reason things out in a different way or process things or react in a different way, you know? Um, yeah. And for people who do not know the culture, um, don't know about Jewish culture and history, and just the facts about us, because you didn't grow up around us or whatever. You got to understand that for so many generations, we we followed our rabbis in the Torah and stuff like that. The Old Testament and the accompanying books like Halakha. Um, some Jews take the Kabbalah very seriously. It's mainly Hasidim that do, or Hasidics, um, and things like that. We we through we have successive generations of doing that and stuff. It's been so determinant and influential in our way. And yeah, so th that has created a lot of resistance to uh, following the ways of other cultures and doing things in their way, which is uh, which has led to um, the conflicts between Jews and many other nations throughout history and stuff. Jews you know are an intensely religiously ritual people and stuff. And you could see the slice of history, the snapshot of history nowadays with the ultra orthodox community. So the ultra orthodox community does not yield for anything or anybody and stuff, and they will do any amount of work necessary to um follow their traditions and rituals and stuff. Um, it's just you know it's just how it is because of thousands of years of of being Jewish, you know. Um, Rabbinics, which is like can be considered the Jewish theory and stuff, um, as you can say was started from the time of the codified oral Torah and stuff, because originally the Torah was spoken orally and recited orally. Um, and the oldest form of Judaism is something like a Karaite Judaism around that time. So something that emerged from the Canaanite religion from thousands and thousands of years ago, a religion that replaced the Natufian religion. The Natufians were the first people in the Levant, where Israel and Palestine or Palestine is right now. Um, so just to give some background there, because the brain it wants to fill in gaps of information and stuff that it can't find, you know. Um, but yeah, so through successive generations of being raised in this rabbinic culture, it like a lot of people of Jewish descent are just very fixed in their their spirit, their attitude, um, and how they regards faith and address it and stuff. Um, However, most Ashkenazim and stuff became atheists in the wake of what they call the Shoah or the Holocaust and stuff. Um, because when a person goes through that and stuff, it's like it becomes completely puzzling to think how there can be a God when their friends around them are, you know, being murdered either instantly or over the course of weeks, months, years, being worked to death and stuff, poisoned to death was like Zyklon B and stuff, and burned in ovens, raped, beaten up, you know, being sold off the uh, to the police and stuff, um, because of the systemic discrimination. So that's just referencing what was going on in the Soviet Union. And I don't think it was Soviet Union was the only place, but in the Soviet Union, particularly Russia and stuff, people were reporting the locations and places of Jews where they were staying so that the Red Army could sell them off to the Germans and stuff for capital, for the war and for other purposes. The purposes were totally, well, I mean, I'm not going to say there were like the purposes were inhumane, you know, um, because when literally use the word totally and stuff, like it kind of skews what the demands and politics of war are and stuff. Russia, the Soviet Union at the time was dealing with a serious threat and stuff from Germany, you know, they, and yeah, so there's that. Um, but this is what happened, and this is what caused so many Ashkenazim to become atheists, for one of many things. Um, the the factor of education is interesting and stuff because whether education makes a person less religious, I mean, it can depend on the college and stuff. Like if you go to Bible college and stuff, or um, a rabbinic college and stuff, you're probably going to be more religious afterwards and stuff. They have pathways for that and stuff. Um, so so I guess we have to stop and examine and stuff like how religion impacts the psychology and stuff. Like if you're really learning something in detail, you're probably more likely to believe it because you're spending time with it. Um, but many Jews just went to uh, non-religious um, educational programs and stuff. Learning the sciences, finance, whatever, you know, including medical science. Um, they're not the only people throughout history that did that. So some people will swear up and down that they did, but that's what they did. Um, but I'm just going to bring this back to discussion and stuff. Like anti-Semitism is a very like it's kind of like the world's favorite sport or hobby and stuff, and it's been that way for like hundreds of years. And um, it's if a person is interested in rabbinics or Jewish history, they're gonna have to learn about it. Um, and I mean that could also be like in an umbrella of like a larger history of racial prejudice and stuff. Uh, Now, the thing about or like a religious prejudice in this case, the thing about prejudices is that they can be exacerbated by economic distress. Um, they can be exacerbated by small scale population genetics, um, things like that, because of how contingent personality is um, the on a person's inner chemistry and stuff, how it affects their brain functioning patterns and stuff like that. But this conversation is getting very tangential. I feel like this quote unquote lesson was just a lot of jumping from topics and seeding different branches of conversation, um, without spending too much heart in that. So, but I guess this is your introduction to uh, Jewish history and anti-Semitism and the other themes of the history. So.
So that wraps up, some of what's going on with anti-Semitism and stuff. Um, it's it's definitely one of the bigger social issues in the United States that has permeated into all sorts of areas. People of Jewish ethnicity, or people who are religious Jews and stuff, or even non-practicing religious Jews and stuff, have seen their lives upended um, by this. I, it's such a huge topic that um, but it's, it comprises of so many sentiments and beliefs and stuff that are just, so characteristic of how the poor quality of education in the United States and stuff. Um, yeah.